Welcome back to Logic Basics. This will be the last handout in a series on informal logic. After this, we'll be getting into more formal logic exercises, and you're going to have to do logic. I'm introducing arguments now because we're going to go from categorical statements and propositions to categorical syllogisms. So I would like to introduce you to arguments and what arguments are used for. They are used to support judgment. So they are the third act of the mind, and I'm going to bring you to this handout, what is an argument, to go over them. Now in this series, we're going to first learn about judgments, and then we're going to go back to arguments. But I do want to introduce it to you so you know where we're going and what the purpose of this whole next segment is. The formal logic segment. All right, so what is an argument? Some people are afraid of arguments. Ooh, I don't want an argument. Arguments always end up badly. It ends up in informal fallacies. Remember all the informal fallacies? That's not an argument. That's a pseudo-argument, a fake argument. And we want real arguments. So remember, I've been saying philosophy proceeds by argument and counter-argument. So what does that really mean? Let's look at this. An argument is the third act of the mind, or the third act of reason, according to Aristotle, and I think he's right. And it follows concepts and judgments. And there's a logical order in our thinking from concept to judgment, then argument. So notice the logical order from more basic to less basic, that presuppositional approach. An argument, there are different kinds of arguments, maybe inductive or deductive. Inductive arguments are probabilistic, whereas deductive arguments strive for necessary truths and indubitability. These are related to the different kinds of justification we talked about when we talked about knowledge is justified, true belief, and we talked about weak justification. Weak justification may be an inductive argument. It gives us a high probability of truth. And strong justification is through deductive argument, so that we get to a necessary truth or something that is indubitable. Now we are going to be talking right now about deductive arguments. A deductive argument uses premises, which are judgments, to support a conclusion. Okay, a deductive argument uses premises to support a conclusion, and these premises are judgments. Okay, judgment, judgment, judgment. You've seen a couple of arguments. I've given you some examples. And so we have an example here. I also have given this one to you in the past. The major premise says, all men are mortal. It's a judgment. All S is P. Minor premise, Socrates is a man. Okay, that's also a judgment. All S is P again. Conclusion, therefore, Socrates is mortal. Again, all S is P. Now, why am I saying all for Socrates? Because there's only one member of the class, Socrates. All Socrates are mortal. There's only one of them, so all of them are mortal. All right? All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Socrates is mortal. That's a categorical syllogism. It's an argument that uses categorical judgments or statements, okay? A deductive argument is considered valid when the premises logically support the conclusion. So validity is the means for assessing or judging an argument. Okay, so a deductive argument is considered valid when the premises logically support the conclusion. Validity has to do with the form of the argument. Validity may be tested by means of logic. Okay, so that's what we're going to do in our section on categorical syllogisms. We're going to test different forms of arguments for validity. Validity is not the same as soundness, though, so let's look at the next one. A deductive argument is sound when it is valid and the premises are true. So valid is in good form, premises are true. So if an argument is valid and the premises are true, the conclusion of the argument will be necessarily true, or will necessarily be true, okay? It'll follow necessarily. Now, here's how we get knowledge. A sound argument produces knowledge. And wherever there is knowledge, a sound argument can be given. So if someone's going around saying, I know that X, then they should be able to give you a sound argument for X. Otherwise, maybe they don't really know it. They're just using that word and they don't really know, which is something that Socrates got in trouble for showing, right? All these people are going around saying, I know that this is justice. And he said, what do you mean by justice? And how do you know that's a just act? And then they couldn't answer. So they're using the word I know, but they didn't really. So if we know, then we have justified true belief, and we can provide an argument. Strong justification by means of sound argument, okay? We want those. We should pay money for sound arguments, because if knowledge is good for humans, and we want knowledge, and having knowledge makes us happy, we should be willing to pay money for them, right? I'm willing to pay money. So if you have sound arguments out there for important truths, then I am paying money. $50. Maybe 100. Maybe I'll give you $100 for a sound argument. I collect them like baseball cards. Got a whole bunch of note cards with arguments. Actually, they're all up here. I commit them to memory. When I get a sound argument, I put it in my memory. Okay, a rational being will accept the conclusion to a sound argument. If one does not think an argument that has been presented is sound, the way to object is by showing that the argument is either invalid, it's in poor form, or the premises are not true. Philosophical discourse proceeds by argument and counter-argument. This is so important because there's a lot of trolls out there. I've been trolled myself. They don't give a counter-argument. They don't even try to identify the argument that's been given. They just say, that's dumb, or you're wrong, or this person's trying to corrupt people. That's what they said about Socrates. He's trying to corrupt the youth. No, he was actually giving arguments, and he deserved a counter-argument. So if you don't like the arguments, give a counter-argument. I don't like it is not a philosophical response. Sorry, it gets me hot under the collar a little bit sometimes. All right. Now, sometimes we have had a bad experience. Maybe that's why I'm hot under the collar. I've had a bad experience with others in discourse. I love discourse. I love rational discourse. But sometimes we think we're going to connect with a person, and it doesn't. We don't connect. So let's think about why that happens. Oftentimes, we fail to connect with another through argument because we do not have a prior commitment to common ground, which is a necessary prerequisite for all human discourse, including public discourse. So I'm going to tell you, when I'm hot under the collar about a past experience, it's because it was my failure. I failed to secure common ground with my conversation partner, and when we didn't make any progress, I realized it's because we didn't agree. We didn't agree on the most basic thing, and it was me that failed to see that. So I was frustrated. I am still frustrated with myself for not doing that. So what is common ground? Let's review. This is from way back when, early on in our study. First, common ground includes the commitment to the laws of thought. That A is A, and the laws of thought are the laws of being. That's where I failed with my conversation partner. We did not have that agreement. Second, common ground includes a willingness to say what we mean and mean what we say when it comes to our philosophical commitments, and to live with the logical consequences of our commitments. Now, I must say I've been in conversations with people who claim to be skeptics, and they don't realize the nihilistic implications of their skepticism, and they won't live with the consequences of their skepticism. So really, if a person's not willing to live by what they say, then we should maybe not have a conversation with them. It's okay to walk away from a conversation where there's not common ground. Third, a recognition that there are some realities that are clear to reason. Some things are clear. Remember our argument? If they don't agree with that, if you don't agree with that, then you're not going to make any progress, and you should probably not talk. And then a willingness to address prior assumptions where there are disagreements. Getting back to what is more basic, the presuppositional approach. Rational presuppositionalism, go back to what is logically more basic. Seek agreement there first. Okay, so let's try to make progress in our discourse by observing these easy rules. Okay, now other areas where lack of progress could come in. Maybe you've had all those. It could be that you've accomplished common ground with your conversation partner, and you're still not reaching agreement. Here's another area of analysis that could help us to figure out why we aren't connecting. Oftentimes we fail to make progress through argumentation because we do not recognize our own or our conversation partner's assumptions. That's what that word interlocutor means. The interlocutor is the other person in our dialogue. So oftentimes we don't recognize our own assumptions or the other person's assumptions. So how can we do this? We can get back to what is more basic. So here, we're willing to do this, get back to prior assumptions, but now we actually have to do it. And so here's how we do it. Addressing prior assumptions includes defining the meaning of the terms we're using in a discussion. Sometimes we're using words ambiguously. The word God. Two people could be using the same word God and mean different things by it. So we should back up and define our terms. Human being. A lot of times we're talking about human beings in different ways, philosophically. So let's define the meaning of our terms, and let's seek agreement on the meaning of the terms we're using before we move on. Do you agree to this definition? Do you agree to this definition? If we both do, then we can take the next step. Recognizing assumptions in how we approach knowledge, the world, human nature, and the good. Remember our house? So if we are going to converse with others, we should be able to identify where they are on the conceptual map. What does my house look like? What does their house look like? And are we disagreeing? Are we agreeing on the epistemology? This is the common ground. If we have the same epistemology, if we're coming at a discussion from the place of reason and rational presuppositionalism, and some things are clear, then we should make progress. We should have common ground. Now we want to examine our foundation, and this may be where we have different assumptions about the world, about human nature, and then our house. What do you think the good is? Do you think the good is pleasure? Oh, I don't think the good is pleasure. So we can get back to that conceptual map to help us to solve disputes. And then we have to think about ourselves and our background. Remember, humans are at the most fundamental level rational animals, but then we have our differing presuppositions, differing personalities, differing backgrounds, differing uniqueness and mood. So we have to recognize that in ourselves and in others. We can have attitude problems, an attitude of cynicism, hopelessness. Cynicism is like there's no hope, and it comes from skepticism. Pride is thinking we know when we don't know. Oh yeah, you're thinking of yourself more highly. Apathy is an attitude of not caring. So we could have an attitude problem in approaching a conversation. We could have different personality types approaching a conversation. So we should be able to identify, think critically about where the source of the problem is. For example, I was giving a talk the other day, and it was a high-level philosophical talk, and there was a person in the audience that said, just give me the bullet points, diagnose the problem, and tell me what I need to do. And I can tell, well, this person's just not enjoying the philosophical level. They want to get to the practical level. And that may be you right now. You may be thinking, why do I have to do this philosophy class? Well, A, it's good for you. You're a human being, and all humans do philosophy. And B, it's going to help you be a better human. And C, it's going to help you think better and get through life better. So there are practical applications. I hope you've been seeing the practical applications as we're going through. All right, so oftentimes we fail to address the soundness of an argument and rather engage in informal fallacies. I mentioned this already, which are not arguments but are pseudo-arguments. Informal fallacies are false arguments disguised as real arguments. You can see this on the news. I can't even watch the news anymore. It's not the news. It's the informal fallacy parade. And informal fallacies are inherently dehumanizing. They're addressing you on the level of your feelings or your will, but they're not addressing you as a rational human being that can understand and is responsible for having arguments. They're motivated by force of will or emotional appeal, and informal fallacies will not aid in the progress of discussion, but will contribute to the breakdown of discussion and to discourse pollution, which is something I want to clean up. Okay, let's look at this last. Oftentimes we're discouraged in argumentation because of attitudes that arise in the process of discussion and due to a lack of patience for a long-term process of discussion. Sometimes a discussion is going to be ongoing. You don't settle it in 5 minutes. You have to come back to it and come back to it and come back to it. So here are some virtues that are helpful for making progress in dialogue with someone who's interested in dialoguing with you. Patience. Patience and the willingness to take time to understand the issues and perspectives being presented in the discussion. We have to do this. We have to stop and ask the other person, what do you mean? Help me understand. Where are you coming from? That takes patience, right? And they may be saying something you completely disagree with, but to treat a person as human is to give them the time and try to understand where they're coming from. Humility is needed, and a recognition that we do not know all there is to know about a subject, and we may possibly be mistaken. I'm mistaken all the time, and I like it when someone shows me that I'm mistaken, but I like it when they do it gently. So here's the next point: gentleness in how we communicate with our fellow human beings. Let's be honest, we're all pretty fragile. We're all broken people. We want to be treated well, and we don't do that often. We're very mean to each other. So think about how you want to be treated in a conversation. Gentleness, with dignity, right? And compassion. We want wisdom in knowing the goal of the discussion and the most appropriate means of communicating to achieve the desired goal. Why are we having this conversation? What is our goal? Is our goal knowledge? Is our goal just to solve a problem? We need to know why we're having a discussion in order to achieve the results we would like. Now, what's the goal of finding meaning and settling disputes? Well, A, we find meaning, a life full of meaning, and settling disputes, we come to a greater unity with one another. We can work together rather than working against each other. And if we work together with the goal of knowing, then we get more knowledge. So it seems like we want to have the goal of finding meaning and settling disputes, and that's what this course could be about, should be about, part of it. Okay, and lastly, oftentimes we avoid argumentation because we confuse argument with debate, which assumes winners and losers, and is a symptom of and promotes skepticism. So some people really love debate, and I guess there's a place for it, but debate doesn't seem to be for the purpose of finding meaning and settling disputes. It seems to be for purpose of setting up two positions and maybe clarifying what they are and seeing who has argued their position better. But a person can be very well versed at debate and argue positions they don't believe in or positions that are false. So we want more than just debate. We want dialogue. So what is the purpose of a dialogue? First, it's for finding meaning through conversation. What does that mean? This is what Socrates was all about. The dialogue to find meaning, to find knowledge. It's for gaining knowledge through sustained mutual pursuit of the goal of knowledge or wisdom. Dialogue is for the purpose of properly identifying disagreement and the source of disagreement. Can we overcome this disagreement? Dialogue is for the purpose of making progress in settling disputes between and among fellow human beings. And I believe we can do this. We don't have to be perpetually divided and isolated. We could come together in a civil dialogue to find meaning and settle disputes and to solve the world's problems. I mean, we have a lot of problems, and these problems do have solutions, but we're going to have to work together to solve them. So working together assumes that we can talk together. So let's start there. So if you want a practical application of this class, how can we talk together to solve the problems of the world? You want social justice? Well, what is justice? And can society have justice? Is social justice justice for a group, or is justice justice and it's for an individual? These are philosophical questions that have practical applications that we can't discuss unless we can have a dialogue that's purposeful and helps us to find meaning and settle disputes. All right, so at the end of this discussion, at the end of this handout, you should be able to define argument, validity, and soundness. You should be able to explain common ground for rational discourse, which is review. You should be able to address how prior assumptions come in a discussion. How do we address prior assumptions in a discussion? Describe the problems with using informal fallacies. What virtues are helpful for making progress in dialogue? And what are the purposes of dialogue? Okay, so I want you to first learn the handout. Think about the handout. What does it mean? Second, is it true? Third, can I put this into practice? If I don't agree with the handout, what is my counter argument? All right, where do we go from here? We just learned about argument, and we're going to now move into the formal logic section of our class or our study. And I may have to mess around with technology for this one because I need to show you how to do things and I need to write on the screen. So I'm going to try to use my iPad and draw on it for some things. But we're going to be moving into formal logic, and you're going to learn by doing. And it might be frustrating to some students, but this is a safe place for making mistakes. And we're going to practice and practice and practice, make mistakes, and then by the time you get to the quiz and the exam, you'll be fine, right? You'll have made your mistakes practicing, and now you know what you're doing. So give yourself freedom to make mistakes here. It's okay, really. All right, next time we're going to start doing judgments, formal logic, okay? We're going to do exercises. It'll be fun, I promise.